This is HR in Review, a podcast dedicated to HR thought leadership, actionable advice, and all the latest developments in human resource management.
Welcome to the episode of the HR in Review show. Hello, this is Bill Banham, your guest host for today. And in this episode, we're going to hear from my good friend, Chris Bjorling, president over at Fidello Inc, associate editor with me over at the HR Gazette, and co-host alongside myself of the popular People and Performance podcast. For over 30 years, since I believe he was about 5 or 6, Chris has led Fidello in creating unique talent management solutions. Through the products and services he and his team have created over the years, his organization has helped clients design, develop, and implement strategic integrated talent management processes and systems. Among these processes and systems are training and development, selection and recruitment, succession planning, performance management, career management, competency management, and learning management. Chris, my friend, welcome to the HR in Review pod.
Thank you, Bill. Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here. I'm glad to be able to reach out to your audience here in the UK, and I'm excited to share our story.
Me too. Yes, this is an entirely new audience for Chris. So Chris and I, we've been co-hosting this show called the People and Performance Pod now for 2 or 3 years, and it's a growing pod, and we've had some awesome guests on from loads of cool organizations, including the likes of NASA, and that's a lot of fun. And Chris also works with me with the HR Gazette, and he's been on a bunch of the HR chat episodes there, and he guest writes for the magazine, and he and I cover events such as SHRM, the Society for Human Resource Management, which is based in the US, listeners. So I know a bit about Chris. I've had the pleasure of working with him now for quite some time, but you, the listeners, don't know that much about Chris. So Chris, why don't you start by telling our listeners a bit more about yourself and your career background?
Excellent. I appreciate that. So for our listening audience here, I've been in the States most of my life. I've had, the pleasure of working overseas on occasions. Most of my clients have been global. It's just, with these beautiful days of virtual, we haven't always had to travel to be there. So I wish I could be in more places and experience more of the beautiful world in which that we're broadcasting to, especially in the UK. I've been to the UK numerous times and spent weeks there training people and providing seminars and such like that. So it's been fun. So a little bit about me is that, yes, I was 5 years old when I started doing this back in 1986. That's not true. But anyway, so if you get a picture on this, you'll see that I'm a little bit older. But that with that age comes a lot more wisdom. It's a lot more experience. It's a lot more opportunity to be in places. So my company started in 1987. So that was a different millennium, let alone a century, and the list goes on down the line. But I was brought in here to this space because it was an opportunity for me, and I took it and I loved it. And it allowed me to get in, and I worked with some large organizations at the beginning of my career, which allowed me to see how things were done, and why they were done and where they were done, and be more strategic in nature versus if anybody that's listening remembers the 1980s, you probably don't, but HR was more of a compliance-based only organization at the time, and it was just tactical and filling out things. So as my career had this exposure to more of the talent management aspects of vision of people, it allowed me to work in that space, and it's something that I grew to have a passion that's there. And so I know we're going to talk a little bit more about who Fidello is, but just the opportunity that I've had over the years to work with corporations like Xerox and lots of different military organizations throughout the world, 3M, lots of biopharma companies, lots of different organizations, Coca-Cola, pieces that you'd understand, and even in the UK that you recognize some of the names. So it's not all been just US centric as I referenced, but those experiences have allowed me personally to see a lot of things and to gain a lot of depth and experience. So that's kind of me. I'm doing it. I'm loving it. And we're having fun. I've got 7 kids, live in New York, upstate New York. It's not New York City. So I'm 6 hours away from the city life. I'm in the country. But we've been having a blast, and we continue to do this. And you and I got together a few years ago on our podcast, and it was based off of some other work we had done earlier. But it's been a blast. So I appreciate being here. Thank you.
This edition of HR in Review is a special guest episode brought to you in partnership with our friends at the North American-based HR Chat podcast, a podcast focused on interviews with HR, talent and tech experts.
It has been a blast. I remember the 80s. I'm, obviously a youngish man. Yeah, right. Great decade, best music, and shoulder pads. Can't beat some shoulder pads. Okay, let's talk a bit more about Fidello, Chris.
Yeah.
Why start Fidello? Why set it up? What's the mission? Tell us a bit more.
Yeah, the beauty of it is that I started Fidello because I needed an opportunity to express myself differently than just being a worker in an organization or a contract with a group. And by starting the organization Fidello, I was able to, start putting together pieces of best practices, things that I saw along the way. Back in the 80s, there was something called the total quality movement, which I was a big part of, and then it kind of got poo-pooed. However, it's come back in various shapes and forms over the years. But anyway, so having done that, I looked at different things and kind of came into this concept of, how do we handle the cradle to grave of an employee in the organization? And when we say grave, I guess it's an old term, but, from cradle to departure and potential recradling again or rehiring. So anyway, so the concept here is that, the organization, I looked at it with this lens as I started it was to, provide support along that journey of an employee's life cycle, being cognizant of the fact that an organization not only just needs to work with the employee, but the employee needs to yield results that help the organization to succeed. And how can all of these pieces fit together and where can they go? Because one of the things we've seen over the years is that a lot of times different aspects of human resource management around people in an organization are splintered. They're set up, as we call them, in silos, meaning that, if I'm working on succession planning, I kind of focus only in succession planning, but I don't look at other aspects of the individual in the organization. So their performance management processing or their career aspirations or, and the list goes on along those lines. So being siloed, sometimes we didn't connect. And so that was kind of the genesis for why we wanted to be there. We wanted to look at the experience of the employee from the start to the finish and be able to dovetail these pieces together and allow them to communicate with each other, leveraging information that goes from one of those siloed organizations to another siloed organization, but allows them to be sharing that in a more intelligent way and providing better benefit not only to the employee and their experience, the employee's experience, but also to the organization and their success.
Why not subscribe to the premium version of HR in Review? You'll get ad-free content, early and extra episodes and more. Even better, although it's the premium edition, it's absolutely free. Sign up at hrreview.co.uk/podcast.
Okay, so as you mentioned, you have been in this industry for quite some time, since you were 5 or 6, I think you said. And I'd be interested to hear from you in terms of what you've seen change in terms of how organizations have designed the employee experience, how businesses have prioritized the employee experience from the early days when you got into this back in the 80s through to today, and particularly, Chris, in the last few years. I'd be keen to get your perspectives on the changes as a result of the pandemic and everything that's followed since then. Can you give us a bit of an overview of some of those procedural pieces that have changed, perhaps some of those cultural pieces that have changed when it comes to addressing employee experience?
Excellent. Thank you, Bill. That's a great question. Yeah, we have seen it change a little bit over time. And it's been a change to the better, I must say. That's been, as you look at the concept of employee experience, when we first started this journey back in the 80s, it was more around compliance. It was more around making sure that the box was checked. It was, somewhat leaning towards, how can you help us in the future, and how can you do this, and what do we need to do to manage your performance so that we can pay you properly. But it was done more from an organizational view or lens. And then, as we looked at it, said that, you really need to, for any human resource information system or process, you really need to look at the what's in it for me, for the employee, as well as for the manager, as well as for the organization. And so oftentimes we meet with some resistance on that, or some half-hearted acceptance of that concept. But when we started to hit the pandemic and people, kind of went away, prior to the pandemic, we were getting more into some employee experience pieces. We're still more, there was a lot of customer experience concepts that were floating and going, which drove some human resource activities and actions. And to some points, when you were focused on the customer experience, you kind of sacrificed the employee experience along the way. But when we started to hit the pandemic period, we had started a switch to, what's that employee experience? How do we make it okay for the employees? And how do we make it better for the employees? And, I think it's been a maturing of the HR space that's allowed us to look at it and say, over time, we were realizing that the engagement of the employee, because that was part before, the concepts of engagements have been pushing for a little while, especially before the pandemic. But how can we get the employee engaged? But to make the employee get the employee further engaged, it's kind of like you have to increase the capability around the employee experience. And what does that mean? So when you look at it from I'm going to throw out the quality word again. When you look at it from a perspective of point A to point B to point C, what is happening at those stages for the employee? And as you look at that opportunity that the employee has to engage with your process or with your systems, and you look at through the lens of the employee, it's like, is this efficient? Is it easy to use? Is it friendly? Is it going forward? And so when the pandemic hit and we, pushed back out to a remote workforce, and then all of a sudden it's like, well, how do we enable them to have computer access at home? And how do we, keep, things secure? And how do we, there were lots of different things that really came back then into focusing on how do we keep our employees here? How do we keep them involved and engaged and being productive during this, oh my gosh, we've never experienced this in the world type thing event that just occurred here with the shutdowns and the pushback. So that view of the employee experience really started to take a strong point moving forward. And there's a lot of research now coming out of the pandemic that highlights the fact that you need to have a very strong employee experience for the individuals, a good employee experience. Let me step back and say that, for them to succeed in the organization, for them to stay. So as we came out of COVID, and we had the Great Resignation, and then we have the employees that are showing up for just their work hours and not committing more. How do we do things differently? And so that experience level piece, is being borne out through practice as well as through research, that it has to be there. And that's a fun thing for HR, or it should be a fun thing for HR. Let's put it that way. If you're not having fun making a better employee experience for your employees, well, step back and look, are you doing it right? Because when you can get your employees to be asking for things that you used to have to push down on them, then you're in a good space. And that's because you've enabled, if they're starting to ask for things, you've enabled a great employee experience, and there's a trust level with them, with you, that it's going to be successful. So great question, Bill. Hopefully I got pieces to it, because there are so many different branches we could go down, but that's the big thing.
Follow us on Twitter at HR Review, or join us on LinkedIn and Facebook.
What I heard from your answer there, and your previous answer too, Chris, is that you are very happy to see the changes that have happened over the years, because it's led to more power to the people, more power to employees, compared to, say, the 80s and the 90s, where a lot of that power sat with the organizations. We are living through very interesting times at the moment. A year ago, if we'd had this chat, we would have said all the power is with the employees. They can, or the candidates, they can pick and choose where they want to go, and it's on the onus is on organizations to attract and retain their best people for as long as they can. Things have changed, of course, over the last year due to economic factors and other factors. But regardless, do you think that employees have too much power today? Is that a possibility? Is this kind of reset that we've seen in the last 6 months, where it seems like organizations can pick and choose a bit more? Again, is that a good thing? What's your take?
Well, I think there needs to be a good balance between the two. You can't always, you have to have a happy medium between them. And so I think, ultimately, an organization's right to choose, because during some of the pre-time that you were referencing, the organization wasn't able to get the right employees too. And there are a couple thoughts behind this, so that, when you get this balance right between the, employees' complete control of the moment, or the organizations, employees should be being hired for the skill knowledge set that they understand the job to be. Okay, great. So if you can represent yourself the best person to be in that position, you know, and then get hired for that, that's great. And that's more of an organizational need, right? We want the person who has the best qualifications to be there, versus I just need somebody to show up. So that's an organizational benefit, but it's also an employee benefit too. And this is why I say it's an interesting, teeter-totter on this balancing act, in the fact that, if the organization chooses the best employee, and the employees represented themselves accurately and fairly as wanting to be there and doing this and having this ability, and they come on board and they're treated well once they come on board, and they're performing that position to what was advertised by the company, but also what the employee advertised themselves as being able to do, and going forward, the level of employee satisfaction and engagement should increase. And therefore, the organization should be pleasantly surprised with having a better engaged employee that's focused on delivering results for them moving forward. So it's that marriage, that balancing marriage between the two sides. And it allows, so when you have that employee experience within the company, we hired somebody for a position. We managed them against that position. We didn't change the rules along the way. We made getting into the organization and understanding our organizational culture and processes easy and efficient through their onboarding process. As we shape that employee experience, as we remove barriers and obstacles, or Legos on the floor, let's call them, that cause pain for employees as they're walking through this process. As we remove those, we're going to have a better engaged workforce. We're going to have individuals who are happy to stay, they're happy to be part of it, and willing to potentially take, advancement upwards laterally, and that within the organization, because you've created a great place for them to work that enables them to be successful and not hampered by broken process or broken activities in an unhealthy culture. So hopefully that answers your question. It's kind of it's that midpoint where they should be working collectively together, the employees there as well as the organization, and it shouldn't be one-sided or the other.
Chris, I'm going to mix things up now, and I'm going to challenge you for the next couple of answers to answer in, I don't know, 60 to 90 seconds or less, I think. For the first of the next couple of questions, let's go with 60. Wow, that's a challenge. So in 60 seconds or less, Chris, what's your secret sauce? How does your team help to identify strategic competencies and behaviors that actually do drive results, and it's proven, and you guys can point to the data and all the rest of it? In 60 seconds or less, go.
Wow, 60 seconds. Here we go. One, first of all, we look to strategic competencies and also the process work that we helped set up to support, taking that data moving forward, on three things. One is, what are the business needs of the organization? Strategy. Two, what's the culture of the organization? How do we do business here? What's normal? What's liked? How do we continue to leverage that? And three, how mature is the organization to handle new processes, thoughts, activities? When you balance those pieces out as you're building strategic models, competency models, and you look at them from those three lenses, you end up with solutions that enable technology, or not technology, but enable the strategic competencies to be used to grow your business, grow your employees, and to deliver exceptional results for the organization.
Oh, I think that was 59 seconds. Just. Okay, next in 90 seconds or less. Talk to me about the technology behind what you do, Chris. How does your HR web software help HR pros manage the process, making the systems, reports, and data available to the people that need them to make those strategic decisions and achieve the right results?
So thank you for the extra time. So in this one, we believe we believe there's not a silver bullet, meaning that no solution that comes off the shelf is going to satisfy an organization's needs. So for us, as we look at creating and utilizing our HR web software, it's more of a modular stand alone concept. So as we need to work in different aspects of the process, meaning whether it's related to succession planning, performance management, career management, selection, recruitment, training, and development, all these different areas, we can pull in these pieces and make it a seamless flow for the employee. Again, leveraging the employee experience to do what is needed for the employee as well as the organization to set it up. So this HR web software's flexibility allows us to do that and provide solutions that are appropriate, or the silver bullet for company A or company B, which can be different. It allows them to have a unique interface delivering specifically for what they need and making that employee experience better.
You didn't even need all those extra seconds, Chris.
Thank you.
So, as I mentioned in the intro, I've had the pleasure of working and co-hosting the People and Performance podcast. I've been working with you now on that for a while. It's good fun. We have I think we have some pretty cool guests on there who have important things to say. The HR review audience may not be as familiar with the People and Performance pod, because generally, as a rule, we have lovely Americans and Canadians on the show. Not always. Sometimes we get folks from elsewhere, but perhaps it hasn't permeated into the consciousness of the British public just yet. Chris, tell our HR review audience more about the pod.
Yeah, excellent. Yeah, so the People and Performance podcast was Bill approached me with this and said, "Hey, what do you think?" And I said, "Sounds wonderful." And so we took the opportunity to pull together and start putting people in there. So some of them are former clients of mine, but a lot of them are former guests that Bill has had in different avenues and venues, and said, "Hey, Chris, this would be a great person to talk to. What do you think?" And it's like, "Yeah, it's brilliant." And so what we're pulling together here are different thought leaders in the spaces that we have. As Bill referenced, it's been mostly on the North American side. We have had Europeans, we've had Australians on. We've had different individuals on that have great ideas, great thoughts that are putting out there. I think Bill referenced, we have people from NASA on there. We also have blockchain leaders that have come on, people that have written lots of books that are cutting edge, and they're out there. So we take just 10-15 minutes or so and interview them with a couple questions that are core to where it's at. So it's just meant to be a quick hit nugget of information around an HR idea or practice. We kind of group the seasons together based upon just a different block of what HR would do. So whether it's selection and recruitment, or whether it's training and development, or whether it's performance management, you kind of have our season aspects along those lines. But it's been a blast. If you haven't heard about it, take a chance, go over, pick up some pieces and pods and listen to them and see if it is a quick hit for you as you're on your daily commute in and out of work.
Yep, do check it out. pp-pod.com is the website, or you can find the People and Performance podcast by going to your particular podcast player of choice. Chris, we have 3 minutes left. I've got to jump. I think you've got to jump as well. So we've got 3 questions left, 3 minutes to go. I reckon that's about a minute per answer. Here we go for the first, and it happens to actually have that challenge in the question itself. The next 2 questions are standard questions we ask of all of our guests. The first one goes as follows: if you could pass on one crucial lesson that you've learned in your career in 1 minute or less, what would be your top tip for HR pros and leaders? Go.
Here it is: be the leader. I've watched too many people have too many doubts about what they were doing over time. I had them myself, and what I found is that and I've done this through not only my workspace, but working with other professionals that are very great. Lead, okay, lead out on ideas. It doesn't have to be completely correct with where you're at, but just lead out, because then what's going to happen is the creative juices are going to start going, and everybody and anybody around you is going to start participating in this process of creativity, and you're going to end up with the best solution. So be the leader.
Love it. Next, what is the single bit? This is huge. To ask you to answer this in a minute is ridiculous. But what is the single biggest change you think will happen in HR and leadership over the next 5 to 10 years? And actually, given that we've been talking retrospectively about what's happened over the last decades, I think this is a great question. What's your take?
I think the biggest thing that we're going to face with, because it's an unknown for us, is the AI workplace. What and where will we be impacted, and how will we as HRs, individuals and leaders of organizations deal with this? That's a big unknown right now. How is it going to change our workers? How is it going to change our workplace? How, is it going to reduce my staff? Is it going to increase my staff? Am I going to be able to leverage this for positive gains for the organization, or is it going to obsolete us or people and move us into a different career? So I think that's the biggest challenge that we're going to have in the next 5 to 10 years, or even sooner.
Excellent. And just finally for today, Mr. Bjorling, how can our listeners connect with you, and how can they learn more about all the cool things happening over at Fidello?
So LinkedIn is the best opportunity to reach out to me. Just pop in there. It's Chris Bjorling. And then Fidello.com is our organizational site that's out there. And then Bill's already referenced our People and Performance podcast. So take a listen there. But LinkedIn for me, Fidello for the organization, and some of the work that we've done and what we do. And that's the way it goes. Bill, thank you for the time today.
Chris, thank you. There will be, of course, listeners, links in the show notes, so you can learn more about Chris and what he gets up to at Fidello, and also what he and I get up to over at the People and Performance podcast. Before we do wrap things up, I just want to emphasize what an awesome guy Chris is to work with and to get to know. I've had this pleasure now for several years of working with Chris. He's an outstanding guy. If you need help with any of the processes that we've spoken about today, reach out to Chris. He is a very genuine person, and he won't take on your project unless he believes that he can help. And if he can help, he'll make a difference. But with that said, Chris, thank you very much for being my guest today.
Thank you, Bill.
The HR in Review podcast is brought to you by hrreview.co.uk. hrreview.co.uk is a website dedicated to human resources and related professionals. News items are posted daily, together with analysis looking in depth at topical HR issues. You can sign up for our range of specialist newsletters at hrreview.co.uk/sign-up, and follow us on Twitter at HRReview, or join us on LinkedIn and Facebook. Thank you for listening.